Um, uh, there, I'll give a little bit of a longer story than just what was, hey Gabriel, than what was just on the blog post, which is how I came to the way I'm approaching the issue around racial equity. In 2005, I got approached by a woman named Lucy Sanders, who was starting a new nonprofit organization that's called National Center for Women in Information Technology. And she asked me to be basically founding chair with her and a couple of other people. And the thing she presented me with was this statement that there was a huge gender equity issue or gender inequity issue in tech, which I knew, like that in 2005 that was very clear. In computer science especially, and she wanted to create. She'd been CTO of several organizations, and the last one was Avaya, and so she was CTO, had 600 people working for her. But her whole life had been as a computer science engineer and then leader. And she decided to spend the balance of her career eliminating the gender inequity in computer science. So getting basically more girls and women involved in computer science. And her assertion to me about it in the moment was that gender equity was an outcome of it, that the reason that she was motivated to do it was because of innovation. And the idea that from an innovation perspective, having more girls and women involved in computer science in the US would make us much more competitive, make our products better, make the companies better, da, 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 da. And the outcome would be gender equity. My joke is she had me at the word innovation. But I had a very strong examples from a couple of women in my life. My mother was a very active feminist as I was growing up. My wife, Amy, and I are equal partners in our relationship. I had been partners with, or at the time even, I was partners with Heidi Roizen, who was one of the original women in VC, and spent a lot of time with her. So I saw a lot of the very, very problematic dynamics between men and women in VC. So I got involved, and within about 6 to 12 months, I learned a few things. One was pretty much everything I thought about gender equity issues were wrong. Almost every time a man showed up, and this was almost always white men, showed up in the conversation around gender equity, at best what they said or did was neutral. And most of the time it was harmful or hurtful. And very, very quickly just realized, like, this is not the way, like the natural approach that, again, white men are taking here is just not useful. And from that, I changed my behavior immediately. And from that emerged the notion of a male advocate, which is probably a phrase that y'all are familiar with in the context of gender equity. And NC Witt did a lot of the formative work on defining behaviors, effective behaviors of male advocates around gender equity. So I give you that preamble not as an equivalence to the issue around racial equity, but as sort of how my own experience evolved. When George Floyd got murdered, I felt very uncomfortable internally. And the discomfort internally was, Amy and I, my wife Amy and I, had always been supporters of social justice initiatives through our foundation and philanthropically going back 20 years. But I felt like an extremely passive participant in issues around racial inequity. Very passive. And I was able to use that experience I had with gender equity and NC Witt, and said, all right, well, I don't actually know what I can do as a white man to be helpful, but I'm quite sure that whatever I think I should do is probably wrong. Whenever I show up in a conversation with a suggestion, it's probably at best neutral, probably harmful. And that the last thing in the world that is useful to anybody right now in this moment around Black Lives Matter who is Black is for me to say, what can I do? what should I do, and put the burden on somebody else versus the burden on me. So I then ended up doing a handful of things. One of those threads, and I viewed it with the same lens I had with gender equity, which is a 20-year, 20-year lens, which is, if you've heard any of my startup community stuff, I think having a very long view on everything is the right approach to kind of any problem that you're addressing. And it's essential in entrepreneurship because nothing, I mean, every now and then there's an overnight success, but almost never. And so with this, at least 20-year view to the issue of, first, the issue of defining what I meant by racial equity. For me, it means eliminating racism in America. So like just defining really clearly what that is. And then one of the things I did was I made a list of people that were entrepreneurs or investors who I knew who were Black or brown. And there were not many. It was a short list. And when I said who I knew, it wasn't that I knew of them, but that I had a relationship of some sort with them that was more than just I knew their name. It didn't have to be that much deeper than that, but that there had at least been some interaction in the past. It was a short list, and it was mostly men, which was also very telling to me in that moment. I reached out to all of them, and then I also asked a few friends who else I should reach out to, and a few of them gave me names. Actually, some of those names overlap. So like Austin, as an example, I knew Austin from 10110 because we were LPs, although we hadn't interacted much around 10110. It turns out we'd interacted around NYU at some event, and I didn't remember that. I knew Austin through the sort of broader network that we had. And then Jeff Harbach at Kaufman was recruiting Austin to be in the program. So Jeff talked to me. When I reached out to Jeff, Austin was one of the names. And also Jacqueline Hester, who we worked with, when I said, this is what I'm going to do, which I'll say in a second, whose name. So like the people who showed up on the list 3 or 4 times, like every one of them, even if I didn't feel like I had a super deep relationship, I reached out to them. And then the people that I actually had a real relationship reached out to them. And I asked one question. And Austin probably remembers the conversation. I hope you remember the conversation. The question was what I learned from NC Wit, which is, what is a thing that you are, and I said 2 things because I wanted to give people some flexibility. And I also didn't want people to say fund my company, right? Which is the easy one thing, like fund me. So I wanted to make it a little bit broader than that. And I said, what are 2 things that you're already involved in that I can get involved in and provide the 3 resources that I have: time, money, and influence. I don't want to create a new thing. I don't want you to create a new thing. I don't want you to tell me what I should do. I want to engage. And I want to engage to support you with what you're trying to accomplish. And the result of that, of course, is that I'll become a supporter of yours, an ally, an accomplice, whichever language you want. I'll be able to provide some resources for it. It might not be transformative resources, but it's something better than nothing. I can provide amplification, and my network will become linked more tightly to your network and vice versa. So that's what I did with it ended up being about 15 people, maybe closer to 20 by now. I have, sort of systematically, with no rush, just sort of mentioning each thing to try to get visibility on each thing so people know about it as a first wave. But most of it is I'm just trying to get involved like this. My email address is in chat now. Every one of you should feel comfortable emailing me about anything. My only request is just remind me you're from this particular program so I can link to it. But questions we don't get to, connections to someone in my world that you think might be helpful, feedback on something you're doing. If you have a product that you think I might be interested in, I have very poor impulse control. I kind of click very quickly on things and enter my credit card. I love to play around with products. So just don't be bashful about anything that I can do, not just, quote, to be helpful, but to engage with you and with your company. because that for me is the way that I'm going to learn, on many different dimensions. And the way I learned from the NC-WIT experience, to start to engage and be effective at helping with changing dynamics around, in gender equity, racial equity, others. So that's kind of gave you a 15-minute version of it, maybe a little bit of an introduction. NC-WIT is National Center for Women and Information Technology. I'll put the link up here in a sec. It's been around for 15 years. I was chair for a number of years. Lucy Standard still runs it. It's about a $15 million a year nonprofit. I believe it's had the most impact on getting more girls and women involved in computer science in the US than anything else. It's a research-based organization. It's affiliated with hundreds of universities and thousands now of companies. And instead of trying to organize things, it's kind of the bottom-up part of the network. Like it feeds to all the other things so that many NC-WIT programs and many of the NC-WIT activities gets amplified rather than NC-WIT having to be the organization that does everything.
Well, I appreciate you sharing this story. I feel like I could listen to you for hours and hours. I'm just sitting here taking it all in. And, I think one of the things that really like stands out to me is your true commitment to mentorship and like really wanting to be involved with companies, not just, writing a check here or there, but really prioritizing that. And I think that's what makes the community at Good 110 so special, is because, that mentorship, or even just one mentor, the right mentor, can have, lifelong impact and change. There was one other sort of topic that I quickly wanted to touch on before we jump into fundraising. And that is sort of around the topic of mental health. So I know with the pandemic and with COVID-19, I feel like we're all, experiencing collective trauma on some level, whether it's losing a loved one or just, trying to navigate the day-to-day. And especially as entrepreneurs, what I often hear is trying to juggle it all and trying to maintain your sanity throughout it. And I feel like you've been very transparent and very open about your own journey with mental health, like experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety. And one specific thing that I thought was really interesting is, moments and experiences that you've shared with your wife and sort of things that you've done to foster that relationship while being an incredibly successful, venture capitalist and entrepreneur. So things like, doing the life dinners and doing the vacations, really committing to that. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs, especially during this time, to really still have that sort of, like, I don't want to say work-life balance, but really, being present for your family and your relationships while also showing up?
Well, there's a lot in that. And one of the things you'll learn about me is I don't know how to give short answers to things. Harry Stebbings and I have become good friends on his 20-minute VC, and he sends me emails in advance of doing an interview. He's like, when I say quick fire, I mean 60 seconds, not 4 minutes. So that's the disclaimer to this answer. So I have a couple things that I'd say on that. One, which is, I would start with a little bit of framing of our current reality. I am an optimistic person. I think, there's plenty of cynicism in our world, in entrepreneurship and investing, more in investing than entrepreneurship. But I think generally most people that are entrepreneurs and investors have a lot of optimism in them. And I'm fundamentally an optimistic person. I think the next 6 months of our experience on this planet are going to be the hardest 6 months of our life to date. I'm 54. I think I'm prepared for this to be the hardest 6 months in front of us. And it's because of a whole bunch of things that you can anticipate, right? We can anticipate, summer's ending. LA has it lucky because it's nice weather there all the time, but, most of the rest of the United States is going to start getting darker earlier. It's going to start being colder. We're going to wander into flu season. respiratory diseases are complicated things. People are exhausted from, the last 4 or 5 months of being, in this other pattern, but this other pattern is going to continue. I believe it's magical thinking that something like a vaccine will show up and everything will be back to normal. In fact, I don't think we're ever going back to what it looked like in February of 2020 across many dimensions of our society. Economic stresses that are coming are accelerating inequities, that have already existed. Many structural things that we have in our society, it's very clear what the fundamental problems are. They're not new problems, but they're problems that you almost can't ignore anymore. And on and on and on, including the fact that, oh, by the way, we're going to have the most contentious election ever. That's about to happen. And last time I checked, like, it's 2020, and why are we arguing about the Postal Service? Like, that shouldn't be the problem. Like, it's just, it's going to be intense in a way that I try to say that not as a pessimistic view, but there's a very powerful theory, which is if your expectations are high and you don't meet them, your unhappiness is disproportionate to if your expectations are low and you exceed them. And so in this moment, I think a lot of people are hearing, there's a lot of external noise about, it has to get better. You have to go back to the office. You have to do this. K through 12 is going to work. And when these things don't work and collapse, it's going to be much harder to process versus if you approach it from the standpoint of it's going to be a real challenge. Again, I hope that I'm wrong, right? And so that's it's not that I'm predicting the future. It's sort of, I think, for one's own mental health to recognize that we have a long arc of this in front of us versus something that just changes is very helpful. With that preamble, a couple of things. One is, I am now using, and have been for a long time, the word harmony instead of balance, and work-life harmony instead of work-life balance. We never really get it in balance. That's an elusive thing. And it also generates this conversation where people who I actually don't have that much, in some cases I might have some intellectual respect for them, but I don't have that much emotional respect for them, constantly say things like, well, entrepreneurship isn't a thing where you can have work-life balance, like you shouldn't even try. And it's kind of like missing the point completely, where entrepreneurship is this incredibly intense thing. You're creating a company, you're doing something where there was nothing before. But having harmony in your life allows you to have sustainability over a long period of time, knowing that you're going to have your own ups and downs emotionally and psychologically and physically in terms of your own energy level. If you have this illusion that you can keep things in balance, you will fail. If you have this notion that as it evolves, you're sort of staying in harmony with it. And when it's non-harmonious, right? If you're listening to, improv jazz, if you've ever listened to it, I'm not a big live music fan, but, put any live recording on, it sounds beautiful. And then it kind of goes off the rails a little bit because they got out of sync. And then you can tell that like something changed again and it gets beautiful again. And that's part of the interesting part of a lot of improv. That's life. And it's especially life if you have a partner. It's especially life if you have kids. It's especially life if you have parents. It's especially, life if you have children. Well, I said kids already, a business. Like, things are never going to be in balance. And when we know we're in an environment where there's an enormous amount of stress, which is the environment we're in right now, much of that stress is exogenous, right? All the stress that all of us on this call have about COVID and the disease, I would say, is a function of an external factor that is largely not under our control. That our behavior has influence on the dynamics from the bottom up. But, I've been immensely frustrated, for example, amongst, masks, because I'm a big believer that masks have high efficacy. I can be as frustrated as I want all day long But really the only thing I can truly control is whether I wear a mask or not when I go outside, or whether I go outside or not, right? So like that sort of stuff is part of the dynamic. So I say all those things. I'd emphasize on harmony. I'd emphasize on the notion that this is a long arc. And if you settle in with the idea it's a long arc without being oppressed by that, but have some acceptance. By the way, I think all of you I hope you think your businesses are long arcs. So you're used to thinking that way. And so it's not that you have to come up with a new way of thinking, it's that you just have to apply it to this very uncomfortable, different kind of environment that we're in. And then last, like, be super empathetic to yourself and to others. This is a moment, and I'm sure I would expect many of you are experiencing this, whether it's with kids or with your family or with your partner or with your life partner, with your business partner. You know, things flare up a lot faster. It's a lot easier to have artificial conflict turn into real conflict, or misunderstanding turn into real conflict. And it takes a lot of energy to engage in that conflict. And it also takes a lot of energy to be more empathetic. And I think that for most people that are trying to have more harmony, coming from a frame of reference of I'm not a sports fan, so my sports analogies are always awful. But there's a whole thing about catching a football. And when you try to catch a football, you want to have soft hands, right? The football comes in and you know, your soft hands get it and then grab it, versus you try to grab the football, like when it's coming in. That's like, I'm sure I got that wrong. But use that notion, like when, you know, just have soft hands with, you know, your engagement with yourself and with others. Last comment, I just had a conversation with somebody about an hour ago that's executive director of a nonprofit that I'm involved in, who's a good friend. And, you know, he was talking about a specific thing. I meditate daily. I'm not going to suggest that you meditate or not meditate. I don't think that's the magic trick. But there is a magic trick from meditation that's also from coaching, and that's also from psychology or therapy that is very helpful, is to name your fear, to say it out loud. Not, you know, you don't have to blog it. You can if you want, but to actually, when you're feeling a fear or feeling anxious or feeling uncomfortable, to literally just, it doesn't have to be out loud, it can be in your head, but just to name it, to label it, and to acknowledge it. We have so many things that are causing, I mean, I'll assert that I think so many people have so many different things that are causing them anxiety in this moment. I certainly am. That when I acknowledge that this thing is causing me anxiety, in a lot of ways, it makes it less powerful. It's a little bit like, you know, when you see conflict, instead of run away from it, move towards it in a business context, because if you move towards it as a leader, your chance of resolving it is much higher. If you move away from it, the chance of it, you know, sort of taking its own course and digging in is greater. It's the same kind of idea. So I'd leave you with that, is like, be kind to yourself, but at the same time, acknowledge those things that are causing you anxiety in the moment. I hope that's helpful. And I also hope that doesn't come off as prescriptive, because I'm not trying to be prescriptive. I'm trying to, all of those are from my own experience, not from a you should do this or you should do that kind of perspective.
I love the gentle hands analogy. And I'm not big into sports either, so I'm like, I get it. But yeah, transitioning into fundraising, what the people are here for. We have a bunch of questions that I know I pre-submitted to you. So we'll try to get through all of them. But I think a good question to start with, and this is a common question that we always get, is at what point do founders know when to fundraise? Like, at what point do you know that you should be fundraising? When is a good time to fundraise?
I think I think it's a very hard question to answer in the absolute. And it's obviously situation and company specific. Generally, I think the goal, and I've been saying this from the very beginning of Techstars in 2006, whenever we talk to companies that go through Techstars, I think the goal as an early stage company should be to raise the least amount of money that gets you to the next level of your business. And I think in that context, it's quite important. It's quite important to understand the dynamics of what that means and how that means. What I mean by that is, if you don't need to raise any money, right? If you can bootstrap, that's awesome. Customers are the best way, to get going and to test things. If you need to raise some money, figure out what you think is the least amount that you need to get you to whatever the next level is. And the nice thing is you get to define both of those characteristics. You get to define the next level, and you get to define the amount of money you need to get to the next level. Nobody else is saying to you that you have to do that. One of the very challenging questions I get as an investor all the time, when I say challenging, like I can't answer it, is an entrepreneur will say, what do I need to do so that you will be interested in funding my Series A? And the answer, I don't know. What are the metrics I need? I don't know. Because by the time you get to that place, the dynamics may be totally different. So it's something to be under your control. The next part of that is by trying to define the least amount of money, you will likely have a scarce resource for others to do, which is buy shares in your company. If the scarce resource is the ability to invest in your company versus the scarce resources the dollars investors have, you're in a more powerful position. Now, when you're at the very beginning of your company, you say, well, I don't have anything anybody wants to invest in yet. Okay. Right. So again, least amount of money to get to a place where people are like, wow, I want to invest in that company. And so one of the mistakes I think a lot of early stage entrepreneurs make is that they hear, oh, I need to raise $1 million. I need to raise $2 million. Oh, I saw on TechCrunch that this other company raised $4 million. Oh, I have a competitor that raised $50 million. And you feel this need to raise more that has no correlation to what you actually need to make progress. So again, I know it's not a precise answer because it's abstract, but that's I think that's a better way to think about it. Last comment I'd make on this is, I'm in my mid-50s. I started my first company when I was 19. I've been hearing over and over again how hard it is to raise money for almost 35 years. You want to know something? It's really hard to raise money. Nothing new there. Doesn't matter what you read, doesn't matter what you see, it's hard to raise money. It's hard to raise money from friends and family. It's hard to raise money from angels. It's hard to raise money from VCs. There are also, by the way, dynamics that make it even harder to raise money, right? You're fortunate in some ways that you're in LA, because LA is a geography where there's lots of early stage investing activity and lots of angel investing activity, et cetera. On the other side of the equation, and it's something that's very apparent, once one starts looking at it, is that there's a lot of biases in early stage investing, and those biases have existed against non-white and non-male founders for a long time. So that makes it harder if you're not male and you're not white. Next, we're in a moment where you can't get together with people. So there's a whole different dynamic around fundraising, especially at the early stage. In addition, one of the things that I've learned very clearly in the last 30 days is the friends and family networks that so many investors say and accelerators say, oh, just, raise your first money from your friends and family. The wealth inequity in the racial inequity problem means that there's not a lot of friends and family that have money that can invest in Black and brown founders. And, just, saying that out loud completely changes the conversation. When somebody realizes it, there's a lot of denial dynamics around that, I think, amongst the traditional investors. Oh, no, it's a meritocracy. But that's bullshit. And like, if you accept that those inequities exist, in some ways, building the network yourself and working with each other, which is really all that's happening with the founders that have friends and family networks, it just increases the challenge, but also the importance of that, right? So the cohort that you have, understanding who's actually got some money, trying to attract that money, and not playing a zero-sum game where, Carolyn gets money but doesn't share the investor with Gabrielle. It's that you're actually working together, also not in the short term. You're working together over a very long-term arc, so that hopefully as there starts to become successes, that generates more wealth to generate more success. So I sort of linked two things together there. Hopefully they landed, but just come back to the notion of money. Money is a resource to help you grow your business, not the thing that validates your business. And if you approach it from the perspective of that, many very successful businesses raised almost no money. My first business, just as an example, didn't raise any money. We didn't have any money. Now, I had lots of advantages. I went to MIT. I could easily get a job. My parents had money, so I knew that, in my worst case, I could always call my parents up and ask them for a couple of months' rent if I needed it. I knew I could always, right? But, it's not that you have to. And I think that's the mistake that's in the current sort of water with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Talking about money, and so you're suggesting that you should figure out like what's the least amount of money that you need for now. But are there any other tips on how do I figure out how much do I actually need?
Well, I think you can back into it as a math equation, right? So if you think about what you believe you need to prove to either get to a place where you have a business where you're selling products consistently to your customers that are generating, a gross margin that you can then use to invest in your business, right? It's not just the revenue that's meaningful, but the actual gross margin. So if you sell a retail product and 60% of that product that you sell, you have to pay to the vendor of the product, then you're only getting 40% of that money to pay. But that 40% can be used for, salaries and rent and technology and investment in the next product. That's a very different dynamic than if you're building a web-based software product where all you have to do is pay your AWS bill each month. And so your gross margin is 85 or 90%. So understanding how your business economics work, the amount of money that you should raise is probably the amount of money that you need to give you 12 to 18 months of progress in the business. And that's not a top-down financial model that says, okay, here's how much we're going to sell and here's what our forecasts are and here's how much we're going to hire and here's how much we're going to pay the people, but sort of goes the other direction, which is, if I don't sell anything, how much money do I need for the staff that I need to get to a place where I ship my product or I'm selling something? Then if you can ship your product and start selling something earlier, how much margin can I generate with whatever staff I have, and how much money do I need to pay for the negative that's generating as I'm scaling it up? And by the way, I'll give an example of, I'll use my first business as an example, which was a consulting business. So, I looked at the sheets in advance. I don't think any of you had a consulting business, but there's, Craig, have a good time. But in a consulting business, the only cost, I had a partner, the only cost we had on a monthly basis because we worked out of our apartments were whatever we paid ourselves. So, we had to buy, I guess we had that telephone bill. That was probably $100 a month between the two of us. We didn't have internet back then. We had a dial up. We both had rent to pay personally. So we had to at least get enough money to pay rent and at least enough money to eat, because neither of us had savings. And that was it. And so we didn't hire a person for 18 months until we had enough business where the two of us were working as many hours as we could work, and we were generating more profit per month than the cost of that third person was. And we kind of grew our business that way. That would be different than, for example, a company that says, all right, well, I don't have a product out of the gate. It's going to take me a year to build a product, which, by the way, most products don't take a year to build. Question that assumption. Most people should be able to get a product into the market quicker than that today. Let's say it's a software product, and let's say your software product is a freemium product, and it's going to be a subscription-based product, and you're going to sell it for $10 a month for each user. Well, $10 a month for each user is not going to pay you for very much. And it's going to take you a while before that $10 per user becomes enough users to start to cover any meaningful salary. And so if you need 4 people in your business that need salaries, then you do the math of what that is, multiply it by 12, and that's kind of the amount that you need. Right? So again, there's no like formulaic view of it, but it's sort of backing into that number and trying to be realistic about it. I would say that most tech businesses kind of need about, $500,000 in that vein. Like, raising 250 helps, but sort of 500, as we've learned from Techstars, kind of tends to be the floor. For a lot of investors today, said, I want to raise $500,000. I go, that's not nearly enough. What's wrong with you? Why can't you raise more? If you go back and you read TechCrunch back in 2007, 2008, there was this whole idea about not overfunding companies. And Austin might remember this. There was this whole trend after the internet bubble of like, companies don't need to raise a lot of money in the Web 2.0 era to get up and running. And if you go look at some companies that have been very, very successful with very little money, like Buffer would be an example. Another example would be 37 Signals that make Basecamp. These are bootstrap businesses mostly, maybe raised a little money somewhere along the way after they got going. They were small for a while, and they built their product and they started generating revenue from customers, and they used their customers to fund that growth rather than investors to fund that growth. So that balance, I think, works. I don't know if that answered the question really precisely, Elizabeth, but.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. We have about 15 minutes left, so I also wanted it to open up to our community in case there were other questions that we haven't addressed. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and then we'll address them as well.
I'll make one more comment about this, which is really important. VCs have a product. Their product is giving you money and buying part of your company. That's their product. So VCs are motivated to give you money. It doesn't mean they will, but that's what their job is. That your job as an entrepreneur is not to receive money. It is not your job as an entrepreneur to raise money. That is, again, go back to this notion, that is a resource for you. In today's world, there is so much noise about raising money that I think it overwhelms the conversation about actually what you're trying to do, which is create a business where one didn't exist before. And I just have always and continue to always, even though I'm a VC whose job it is to give people money, try to emphasize that you can build businesses without needing to raise money. There's no reason not to raise money, but use that as your framing of what is the business I'm trying to build, what are the resources I need, versus there's this thing called venture capital, and I need to get some of that to then go build my business.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. One of the things that I really love and appreciate about Grid 110 and our community is that just a diversity of like pathways, and especially funding pathways that our founders take. So there are, you know, founders that are very strong and committed to bootstrapping, and then there are those that do VC funding. So as like a startup operator, it's been really fun for me to see just all of the different options that I wasn't even aware of a couple of years back. So thank you for highlighting that. There's not one way, there's a lot of different options. I guess another question that I have, this isn't necessarily fundraising specific, but what is some general advice that you would give? Like if you could leave our entrepreneurs in our community with like one advice that you have for early stage entrepreneurs, what would it be? You know, a lot of our founders range from, you know, starting from the idea stage, or they might just be about to launch their business. But if you could leave them with one thing, what would it be?
Make sure you are working on something that you believe you are put on planet Earth to work on. I use the word obsession instead of the word passion in the context of this. You hear it a lot. Make sure you're passionate about what you do. Passion is so easy to fake. If you're an extrovert, you can make a mouse be something that you're passionate. It's just a fucking mouse. It just controls the pointer on your computer. But you can convince people that it is the greatest, most amazing mouse ever in the history of mouses. If you're an introvert, it's often quite hard to be passionate about things because that's not your natural emotional state. It's almost impossible to fake obsession. And as somebody who has worked with a lot of different entrepreneurs over the years, the ones who literally believe that their purpose on this planet is to build this company are the ones at the early stages that have the most resilience. Doesn't mean they're successful. They just have the most resilience. And part of it comes from, you know, if you're excited about something or passionate about something, but you're not obsessed about it, when it gets really challenging, which it always does every single time, it will be much harder, you know, to continue to climb up whatever the metaphor, continue to climb the mountain with a backpack full of rocks on your shoulders. Like, it just gets harder. It's like, fuck it, I'm putting this backpack down, or I'm done climbing this fucking mountain. If you were put on this planet to climb the mountain and you had to get the rocks to top the mountain, and that was what you're put on the planet for, you're going to get the rocks to top the mountain, right? Like, it's just such a different mindset. And it's so important at the early stages because the company that you're trying to literally will into existence is so fragile. And by the way, that doesn't mean that if you wake up one day and you're like, you know what, I'm not obsessed about this. That doesn't mean that the right answer is to stop. It also doesn't mean that it's not wrong to say, you know what, I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. I don't want to do it this way anymore. Or a different opportunity or a different approach came up, or a different set of partners came up that I really actually, to accomplish what I want to accomplish, I can do it this way. Like, keep focus on that as a motive force for you, rather than just, you know, some internal narrative of, I want to do a thing, I need to do a thing. Like, are you obsessed? The other thing this one's really hard. And at 54, it's still really hard. I think I've always been pretty good at it as a human myself, but it's challenging, is there is so much noise in the world that is not useful to you in the context of building your business. And much of that noise is about what other people are doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it the way they're doing it. And a lot of it is comparison of how you're doing to somebody else is doing. Not that they're making to you, but that you're making to them. There are endless people in the world who will not get what you're doing. They will not believe in what you're doing. They will not support what you're doing. Like, all of these things that you naturally, as humans, we internalize. And figuring out how to view that as data without it impacting you and your energy level and your obsession about something is really challenging. you know, I'll give an example. We had a company called GNIP that was doing very, very well. And they had a competitor called Data something. I forgot the whole company's name now because they went away. Data Stupid, let's call them that. And they were our evil competitor. And we were beating them, we thought, all the time. And at GNIP, we raised very little money. The company had only raised $6 million and became profitable and was growing very quick. And Data Stupid had raised more money, $20 million or something like that. And we thought we were kicking their butts. And I remember this very clearly. I was on vacation. And I got back from vacation. Maybe I was even on vacation. Yeah, I was. And I don't usually, you know, I take a week off. I don't check my email. And for some reason, I went and, you know, checked Tech Meme or something. I don't know why. Or maybe somebody texted me. And I saw that Data Stupid had raised $80 million. And I remember, like just the emotional feeling that I had was one of sinking, you know, of one of just distress as an investor. I wasn't even the founder, right? I wasn't even the CEO. In the end, we ended up getting bought by Twitter. Good outcome, $170 million, something like that. Data Stupid ended up failing a couple of years later. We got bought by Twitter. We found out that we had 95% of the market and they had 5% of the market. So even though they'd raised more than 10 times the amount of money as us, they were unsuccessful and made tons of noise about all kinds of things. They were unsuccessful relative to us. The CEO, Chris Moody, who's one of my partners, actually was quite good at doing what I would tell him to do as a board member, which is make sure you understand your competitor's product and then completely ignore them. Like just know what their product is and know what the strengths and weaknesses are. And of course, you have to sell against and stuff like that, but don't spend emotional energy comparing yourself to them. It's really hard. And I could give 10 more different flavors of that, right? That's about a competitor, about another entrepreneur, about what an investor did, about somebody you once knew. And again, data, so you know about it, but try not to let it influence how you're feeling and focusing on your business, especially at the very early stages, because you're the most fragile when you're at those very early stages.
Thank you for sharing that. It does take a lot of grit and resilience to be a founder. I often get asked, like, Elizabeth, have you ever thought about building your own company? And I always say I am just like so fully aware of what it's like. I've worked with too many founders and I don't know how they do it. So like, yeah, kudos to all of the entrepreneurs out there. I admire, and all of you inspire me every single day, but I could not do what you all are doing.
I'll key off a word, Elizabeth, that you use, which is really powerful. Resilience is an incredibly useful word. Mm-hmm. You know, I run marathons, and I've run 25 marathons. And after I finish a marathon, I always say to my wife, Amy, boy, that was a hard marathon. And she says to me, every time, you say that every time. And now it's a joke between us. Every marathon's hard. Like I've never run 26.2 miles. Like, it's no big deal. Like whatever. It's always hard. There's always, you know, you twist your ankle. It's a hot day. You're under fluid. You have to go to the bathroom, and there's no bathroom for 4 miles. You know, there's too many people. There's not enough people. The food made you nauseous. There wasn't enough food on the trail. You got a good night's sleep. You didn't get a good night's sleep, or everything's going great, and then at mile 21 you blow up. And you know, the last hour takes 17 days to get through. Everyone. But what happened, the first time I ran a marathon, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And I got through it. And the second time I ran a marathon, I still didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And I got through it. And the third time I got through it, and by the 15th time, I had a lot of resilience. And I kind of knew somewhere along the way, something's going to get all screwed up. And I'm just going to have to like work my way through it. I have a blog post I wrote a while ago. That's one of my favorites still, and gets sort of pops up every now and then, gets passed around. And the blog post is, something new is fucked up in my world every day. And the key is the word new, right? It's not that I have a thing that's fucked up. It's every day something new breaks. And that's because I'm involved in lots of companies, right? So a company might be doing great over here, and like this one I wasn't paying any attention to, and all of a sudden, you know, something crazy happens. And at some point, I started to become curious near the end of the day if I hadn't heard what got fucked up today, right? It's kind of like, I wonder what it's going to be. And that's resilience, right? It's just, it's not that you're not able, you know, you're immune to any of it, but you just sort of build that resilience. As a founder, to the extent that you can build the resilience and build the resilience and build the resilience and know that that's what you're doing, it's really powerful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess I want to wrap it up by talking about one very exciting thing really quick. So as I was preparing for our time today, I learned two things we actually have in common. Number one, we were both raised in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, yeah?
Which is where I'm currently am. I'm quarantining.
Where in Dallas are you?
I'm in North Texas, like near Denton.
My mother went to graduate school at University of Texas at Denton.
Yeah. So I'm here. And then the second thing is we both have a huge passion for startup communities in general. And I just wanted to take a minute to plug your new book that came out very recently about startup communities. I wanted to give you a chance to share a little bit about it and why people should get it or what it's about.
Well, here's the link to it if you want it. This book just came out end of July. It's a sequel to the book I wrote in 2012 called Startup Communities. And when I wrote that book, the phrase startup communities didn't exist. So I wrote that book because I believed that people should be able to create startups anywhere in the world they wanted to. And I also believe that any city with more than 100,000 people, because Boulder is 100,000 people, so that was my reference point. Any city with more than 100,000 people should be able to create a startup community. It'll be on Audible probably in about 2 months. And that I developed this perspective that every city in the world that had at least 100,000 people needed a vibrant startup community to be part of the innovation infrastructure of the city. So this is a sequel. One of the principles of what I called the Boulder thesis from the first book is that you have to take a 20-year view. I've also evolved that to say you have to take a 20-year view from today. So I've lived in Boulder 25 years, so I'm not on -5 years of my journey, right? I'm on 25 years of a 45-year journey now. You just have to have a long view. We talked about this a little earlier. And by about 2017, in 2012, entrepreneurship was just starting to become a thing again. When I started working on the book, it was 2010. We were still in the tail end of the global financial crisis. And so, you know, it was the very beginning of the wave of now entrepreneurship that we've had for the last decade. But by 2017, I started getting the question from lots of people all over the world, you know, that was kind of the equivalent of what's next? You know, what should we do now? We've been at the startup community thing for a couple of years. What now? And it wasn't very satisfying to say to them, hey, remember, it's a 20-year thing, right? That didn't feel very helpful. So I started working on, with a co-author, Ian Hathaway, on this new book to answer that question. Okay, I've been at this for a while, what next? And we wrote about 40,000 words, which is most of a book. Took us about a year, and then it sucked. We threw it away. We just didn't like it. We were very unhappy with what we'd written. And we were really struggling with like, what are we trying to do here? And Ian called me one day and he said, I've come up with a framework for the book, which is the idea of a complex adaptive system, which we've shortened to complex system, just so it's easier to deal with. I'll define a complex system in 30 seconds with an example. There are 3 types of systems: simple, complicated, complex. Simple is making a cup of coffee. Beans in, water in, machine, process, deterministic outcome, cup of coffee. Might be a shitty cup of coffee, but it's a cup of coffee. Doing your monthly financial statements. See you, Carmen. Thanks for joining. Doing your monthly financial statements. That's a complicated system. Lots of steps. Steps could be in different order. Still a deterministic outcome. You finish with balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement. Raising a child or being a child and growing up is a complex system. If your parents on day one said to you, this is what you're going to do over the next 50 years of your life, the only thing I can guarantee you is that you would be doing a lot of therapy as an adult. And probably you'd be doing almost the opposite of what your parents told you that they thought they wanted you to do. So a startup is a complex system. The COVID crisis is a complex system. The health part of it, the economic part of it, the mental health part of it, the racial equity part of it, which has been amplified. Racial equity dynamics are not new. They've been going on from the beginning of our country, but all of these things are interacting without a deterministic outcome. You can't say on day 274, this is what's going to happen. And yet as humans, we try to control everything from the top down. We want things to be predictable. We want to be able to plan. We want to have, and that's just not how a startup community grows and evolves. So that's what this book is about how complex systems work and how they're applied to startup communities and what's important in terms of the development and evolution of a startup community. And interestingly, the book is not just applicable to startup communities, but it's applicable to startups, and it's applicable to any complex systems. And we do a lot in the book to sort of talk about that in a more general way, because our goal was not just to focus on startup communities, but to try to encourage people to think about things using a complex systems approach, and using then the startup community as the example to underpin it. So that's what the book's about. If you're interested in your startup community and evolving it, I think the book's super helpful. People that it's been out now for a couple of weeks. We've had a bunch of people read it and gotten a lot of good feedback from early readers. We had good feedback before the book came out. So, it's always a little nervous when you ship your product. You're not really sure whether you ship something good or something that's a total piece of shit. And unfortunately, with a book, you can't iterate. It's kind of done. That's the thing. But sort of early returns are good. The other thing I'll give you all just before we split is in our current world, I've come to believe that the premise that I had for so long, which was that you had to have a place-based startup community, or startup communities that were focused on place, which is a lot of what we've written about, is evolving also, where geography is less important or place is less important. It's still very important, but building virtual startup communities, building startup communities that cut across geographies, figuring out how to deal with non-urban or rural startup communities with cities and towns that are much smaller. All of these things are important. And so to the extent that you're interested in being part of an experiment, that link that I just tossed up is a virtual startup community that I've created. It's completely an experiment. It's totally bottom up. It's completely organic. You can invite anybody you want. There's already about 4,000 people in it. It's been pretty vibrant. We've only had a few trolls, and I'm trying to take an approach with the trolls that are different, because most of the trolling that's happened so far has been, I would say, insensitive to people who are either Black or women, not in a hostile way, just insensitive. And the one person that was the worst at it, I actually spent some time with him and tried to help him understand why what he was doing, it was actually, he was well-intentioned, once you actually spent some time and got to know him. And he was behaving the way he was behaving because it fed something in him. Not to be discriminatory, but, to have sort of, the words he was using was these zingers, like he felt good to put these zingers. And I tried to explain to him, and I think he heard it, sort of in the context of a goal of something like this, why that's maybe makes him feel good, but what's actually going on. So trying to do things like that, which you would do in a local community, right? You would do if you were face-to-face. You wouldn't ban the person from coming to the events. You try to have some kind of engagement with the person to help them understand why what they're doing wasn't constructive. And so I'm experimenting with some of these things. I think for the next decade, I've got plenty to work with between the startup community way, complex systems, and some of this other stuff on this topic. So hopefully it's helpful to you.